Ladies and gentlemen, guys and girls, welcome to another episode of the Age of Warfare podcast. Alongside the gate, Aiden Cody, my right-hand man, and for the first time since the show was rebranded, we have our third man, the legend, Edwards.
Morning,
All right, today we are going to be talking about a couple of weeks ago we talked about why Latin America was a failure, and Aiden brought up an interesting topic for this week, for this episode, and we're going to talk about the problems that are in Europe and how does history relate to these many problems in Europe. And before we get the show started, Aiden and Lee, how are you guys doing?
Not too bad. Bit of a gravelly voice because I was out last night on a work meal, but apart from that, I'm doing all right.
And Lee, how are you doing?
This first time I've been able to breathe. A lot of medical stuff with my daughter and everything, and then we took her on a vacation to Florida because she's having major surgery this Thursday coming up, where we wanted her to have a good time before the surgery because she's going to be down for quite a while.
Oh yeah, I wish her not of luck with that. What's the surgery for, by the way?
She has scoliosis pretty bad due to her AKH. She can't walk, and she's bedridden, and the spine went, and it started smashing into her organs. It smashed into the lungs, so she can't breathe, and she gets pneumonia. So they're going to go in, and they're going to actually straighten out from a 90-degree angle. They're going to straighten out her spine, and then they're going to fuse part of it so it stays straight. And then they're doing this experimental thing they're doing now. They said that this is only the third surgery they're doing. They're going to actually fillet her back muscles and bring them up and over her spine for more protection from infection, and then close up over that. So it's going to be skin, then the muscle, then the spine, and then the muscle on the side. And then they said they're also going to take muscle from a different region that she doesn't use up in here to also impact the spine, pack it in with muscle.
Oh, wow. That's pretty major then.
Yeah, it's pretty
major. So we wish her not luck with that. And all right, so now that we got the introductions out the way, let's get into the meat and potatoes of this episode. So last week we did Latin America, and this week we're going to be doing the Europe. So I guess I've been doing some research about Europe. So I guess I'm just trying to find what is the best place to start with in Europe, since it's a really big continent. Where should we start? And
can I do the start, because I've got a good place for the start. So one of the big things about Europe is obviously we're denser than somewhere say like the US, but we're roughly the same sort of geographical size when you include all of Europe.
Yeah.
But because we're denser and we've been separate countries for so long, it's where you get different cultures between different states. It's far more pronounced within Europe. So then we've got the European Union, which is an effort to try and bridge those gaps and bring people together. But that then is bringing all of the different political positions and political issues in different countries together, which can cause some issues, which is obviously the major thing we'll be talking about in this episode, where the different types of politics and how the history has played into having those different types of politics and how that meshes together and where it's caused issues between the countries, really. So, do you want to start with a specific bit?
The specific bit, I guess what we could start with is let's start with Russia, because I think Russia and Ukraine are very interesting. It's a very interesting thing what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. Obviously, we know we have the Russian-Ukrainian conflict going on right now, but the thing that I've been researching, and Aiden, you play Cossacks on the PC, and there's actually a campaign, a Ukrainian campaign, where you have to defeat Russia and the Poland and the Turkish raids. So the way I see it is, even though it's not not of what you would call it conflict in Russia, it's not old. This has been going on since the 1600s between the
Yes.
Cossacks, between the Don and Ukrainian Cossacks.
And
So
it's one of the interesting things about it is, and if you, I'm sure we've all seen a lot of the propaganda from both sides on it. And one of the major things that came out of Russia and things that Putin was saying was the Ukraine is historically part of Russia. Oddly, it's the other way round when you look at it. So European Russia especially is comes from where the Vikings travelled down towards Constantinople to have that trade route, and then the settlements came out from there. You then have towards the north when you're getting into Latvia, Estonia, and all of those places. You've got the Teutonic Knights at the later periods coming in as well. So you have those places building it up. Not long after that's happening, you then have the Mongols come in and they take over the entirety of Russia for many, many, many years. Russia then frees itself from that. That all the people get together. So really, you have the core centers of Moscow, and then you've got sort of Ukraine and around that area as well.
Yeah.
You've got essentially 2 or 3 big polities that had to work together. So they have historically been allied, but are separate in a lot of different ways, which is obviously where a lot of the basis of this conflict comes from.
But and here's the a couple of things I wanted to point out, Aiden. Are you familiar with the term Drusina? Drusina, which is was a Slavic chieftain. That's how Russia was founded by the Rus, which was a Slavic tribe.
Yeah.
And after that, before it became Russia, it was called the Novgorod Republic. If you remember Russian history, it's called the Kingdom of Novgorod.
Yeah, so you've got Novgorod, then obviously you've got what was Muscovy? No,
Muscovy, yes, the Duchy of Muscovy, if you really want to get specific.
And it's when you look at Europe in general across that, is the countries in this is one of the other things that people don't realise is how new the countries of Europe actually are. Everyone thinks of us as very old, but we culturally, the areas are very old, and we solidified into countries incredibly late. It's only really the 1800s where you get the countries. Even if say you look at the UK, the current form of the UK was only really formed in the early 1900s. It was after the 1916 uprising in Ireland, and after that was resolved. So you're talking the 1920s that we actually the UK is what it is from that. The whole of the UK, as you imagine, sort of the British Isles, and that being one sort of unit as such, that is only the 1600s. Really, it's the Act of Union was 1707 as well. Really, is where the United Kingdom, that's its core foundation. So it's realistically what we see as the UK now is only like 70 years older than the US as a specific group of coming together. Then you've got France. There was a lot of obviously a lot of the different territories. And if you look at the medieval period, you go, oh, well, England was fighting France. It wasn't England fighting France, though. It was 2 noble houses fighting each other who had lands, and it was all different.
And that's a very important distinction.
Yeah. Germany as well. It was the Second Franco-Prussian War where they formed Germany after they defeated France.
Germany and Prussia.
Yeah, and so you then have that, which then obviously the First World War leads on, is essentially comes out of that conflict, the formation of Germany.
And don't forget, after World War II, Germany was divided between Western and Eastern Germany, which Western Germany was Germany, and then you could say Eastern Germany was kind of the Prussian Empire. If you really want to dig into it, there you go.
So everything east of France is only 1990 is the formation of the countries east of France. So that's like in our memory, like we were all alive before those countries existed in their current forms.
Right. And then now, I'm not going back to Russia for a moment. Don't forget the Russians. The Russian steppes, they were controlled by the Scythians. If you want to go out to Roman times, that was part of the Scythian Empire.
Yeah.
And Rome, the Roman Empire never got control of the Russian steppes. The Russian, like you, I mean, they had parts of maybe Crimea. I think at the biggest extent of the Roman Empire, I think they had parts of Crimea.
Yeah, Crimea. Yeah, the Crimean Peninsula that comes out of the Black Sea.
They had, as the furthest east they went was Romania. So you could say Ukraine and Russia never fell into the influence of the Roman Empire, which is why their culture is so different compared to the rest of Europe. They were involved into the Slavic culture. But you know what I'm saying is, compare that to Croatia. Don't forget the Croatians, they were taken over by the Roman Empire. They were the Illyrians, and then they were taken over by Rome. And then later on, the Slavs took control. After that, as the Roman Empire fell.
It's that's when you get into the Byzantine Empire as well.
Yeah.
That whole region was basically one giant war zone for hundreds of years after the collapse of the West. And that was the migrations that went through the West. Obviously, there wasn't much to hold them back. So they sort of made their way through and settled. And then it was like the Vandals went through southern France, ended up in Spain, and then ended up in North Africa. And whereas the Eastern Romans were able to hold off a lot of them and then have treaties with them as well. But that you still had those large tribal units coming in or trying to come in at the same time, which just led to that whole area being a massive war zone. The Danubian Limes, which is my undergraduate dissertation was on, and it's culturally the change, like we talked about, the change in the Roman military forces. That was all to do with that change and that mixing of cultures in that area. And it's one of the reasons, especially when you look at the later on after the Turks take Constantinople and then push up through the Balkans. So you end up with these massive, the Bosnian Muslims are weirdly, there's a whole weird thing with the Bosnian Muslims, not actually being that connected to the Turkish invasion, but sort of being. So you end up with a lot of these different tribal groups that came in and settled, kind of concentrated in areas, which is why it's such a hodgepodge of small countries.
Right.
And it's still going through, obviously when the Soviet Union came along, it went, right, cool, you're all this one thing, which all it did was stick a big plaster over the top of it. Everything underneath was still there. So as soon as Yugoslavia collapses, this is why the 90s was filled with wars in the Balkans constantly. And the conflicts there are only really just settling down. It wouldn't be a surprise if they kicked off again in the next 10 years, especially when you look at obviously what's happening in Ukraine as well. Tensions in the region are high, and it's the way that those countries are supporting Ukraine as well, because they didn't like being controlled by a Soviet empire or even being under that massive influence. And that's a hangover from being controlled by the Byzantines, followed by the Turks, followed by the Austro-Hungarians, followed by the all the various things that happened after that. And then you get into the Soviet Union.
Plays a part.
Yeah. So it's all, you get this constant conflict.
Now, because I got a friend, I got an officer friend. He lives in Zagreb, Croatia. He lives in Croatia, and he tells me that Croatia and Bosnia, they don't get along with each other. They don't get along. And he says, things in Croatia are getting a little tough right now, and things could heat up. And it does go back to like you said, the history. History plays a big role in the Balkans, and it's not just Croatia. You got Albania. You got Macedonia. You got Greece.
Yeah.
You got all these areas in the Balkans. It's like you said, a hodgepodge of different nations that don't necessarily get along. And then you got the Czech Republic, Slovakia, Slovenia.
Yeah,
it's a hodgepodge.
And this goes back to what I was saying with the countries in Europe being fairly new. but actually culturally and historically, there's some very deep history in all of those different areas. Like you're saying, with Bosnia and Croatia, there's two
Bosnia,
different, essentially historical tribal sources for those two different groups, and they've got on and they've not got on. All you've got to do is look at Germany, saying Holy Roman Empire. It was, they all had a big council, they got together and then they had an emperor, but that was more like how the initial way the states came together. The states were all independent, and then they went, right, cool, well, when we get together, let's have some sort of group of people at the top, and then we'll have a president to make decisions, but we can then get rid of them if we want to, and we'll still retain rights to a whole bunch of other stuff. So you end up with all of these polities. Some of the early ideas for formations for in Germany of pushing areas together was obviously Napoleon when he took Germany and held it for many, many years. And what's quite interesting when you look at the Napoleonic uniforms as well,
right.
If you look at the Silesian uniforms and how close they are to some of the Russian uniforms, and the Russians based their uniforms on the Prussian uniforms, and then you had the Polish Lancers, and everyone based their Lancers on the Polish Lancers, and so you end up with these sort of weird connections throughout Europe, and a lot of it comes from traditional dress, the cut of someone's suit, for example, being a different thing. 2 seconds.
Yeah, unfortunately, Lee is having some internet issues, which is why,
he looks like he's trying to sort them out at the moment.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, and I mean, he was looking pretty good earlier, but internet problems have caught up now. But we can hear you.
Just about.
That, like, you guys were talking about Russia, then all of a sudden it froze and it was Rome, and then all of a sudden it came back and you guys were talking about Croatia. So I'm confused.
I don't think pretty much everyone in Europe's confused with that whole situation anyway, so you're not far behind.
Now, I got an interesting one for you, Aiden and me. I got a very interesting country, the country of Cyprus. Yeah, I don't know if you know that little island. That little island that's between Egypt and Turkey. Island of Cyprus. You got Greek and Turkish influence there. Cyprus is a very interesting case because
British protectorate for a long while. My dad grew up there as well. He grew up in Iran and Cyprus, obviously in the sort of 60s, and that was to do with this conflict of why we were there with that division on the island, and that goes right the way back to that initial Turkish expansion as well, that just never truly got resolved.
But the reason I brought up Cyprus because this is not a history in Cyprus too. Going back all the way to the Bronze Age as well. Cyprus actually had its own. It actually had their own kingdom before. In the Bronze Age. Believe it or not. Obviously, we don't know too much about that about the particular kingdoms of Cyprus before Egypt took over. But I think there's a good video about it that you're gonna want to check out, and it's about the Bronze Age history of Cyprus, because the written history really begins when Egypt took over Cyprus, and they remained. I forgot what they remained it to. Some Maya. I can't. They did.
I'm the same with what the Egyptians named anything outside of Egypt is.
But then eventually eventually it was remained to Nicomedia. The Byzantines eventually remained it again. The Byzantines. When they took over the island of Cyprus, it was under Byzantine control, or Byzantines for the Americans out there. We call it Byzantines, but anyway, and then really Cyprus is. It's gone from Egyptian, Roman, Byzantine, and then Turkish control until it became independent.
There was also all the stuff that happened in the Crusades as well, with the I've forgotten which knightly order it was, that they basically controlled the island when it was taken
I think it was the Knights of the Hospital.
Oh yeah, Hospitallers. Yeah.
Hospitals,
Knights of the
yeah.
Hospital. Yeah.
Yep.
Which is the Knights of St John at the hospital. So in the
Yep.
UK we have a medical thing, and they do all of the first aid training stuff. It's
Yeah.
the same people. It all comes out of that, and I believe the Queen was the head of the Knights Hospitaller for a long while. I don't know what they ended up doing with it. But yeah, it became an aid organisation, which is why the order was set up in the first place. Hence the name hospital in it.
Right.
As well. They became a military order later on. It's one of the reasons they weren't disbanded, because they did all of the medical stuff, as it were. Because a lot of the knightly orders were set up as protection for pilgrims, essentially. So because obviously the Holy Land is called the Holy Land, it's full of holy places for the major religions of the West. And it's easy pickings jumping on a group of pilgrims, because they're going to have to carry their wealth with them, which is where you get the whole thing with the Templars and them with their early banking system as well. It's why the knightly orders were set up, and they did these different things. But obviously, they needed home bases that weren't just in the Middle East. So you get a lot of the islands in the Mediterranean are based around a castle and the central holdings. And this goes way back to what we were talking about before, where it was duchies that worked together and had someone in charge of them. And they were essentially the same thing. They were a duchy. They just were controlled by a military order rather than the more traditional nobility that we would think about as well. And obviously, their monarch, as it were, is the Pope. So it's the same system that was really in place. And it's so to move that bit on and that concept. Cyprus is a really good a good one to bring this up in. Is there's this religious aspect that goes along with it as well. So the Islamic invasions and the Islamic expansion, obviously, they took over a lot. They hit the Byzantines, and the Byzantines held them off for quite a while. You then had Justinian plague, which completely destroyed the entire population. They then started losing lands. The Battle of Manzikert, they had their main military force completely wiped out. So asked the West for troops, and that's where the Crusades come from. Is they needed troops to hold back the Islamic invasions. But what people often don't talk about is the invasion didn't just go that way. It went across North Africa, up into Spain. And it didn't just stop at Spain. People go, oh, well, they took Spain. They didn't. They had the Battle of Crécy. The first Battle of Crécy was actually the Islamic invasion of Europe. And that's quite a way into France. They got really far into France. And then they were fought back to the Pyrenees. And because that's quite a hard border, that then led to the slow reconquista of Spain, then becoming a Christian nation once more. And oddly enough, that had been happening for a very long time, and then was called a crusade later on, when they were like, well, we've always been doing this. That's a crusade, and it was all to do that was political support and financial support, those reasons. However, obviously, with the remnants of that in eastern Spain, especially, you had when the caliphate split up, because it's such a large area. It's the same thing if you think of Alexander the Great. After he dies, his empire splits up into all the different dynasties. The same thing happens after the initial Islamic expansion. And you end up with the Sufis, especially in eastern Spain, and they're all about knowledge. So the whole idea where Europe lost a lot of knowledge and then it regained it through Islam, that's where it did, because it was the Sufis that then brought that knowledge, especially from the Byzantine areas where it was still there. All of that old Roman knowledge was still around in those areas. We lost it when we lost the Roman Empire, because for various reasons, we didn't need a lot of it as well. It's like the building techniques. You don't need to build an aqueduct if you live in a village. It's a bit excessive. So those techniques were then brought through with the Sufis, and then the Sufis also protected the Jewish populations against the sort of like the hardcore Knights Templars as well, and the hardcore Christians. And obviously certain groups, such as Islamic groups as well, which is how you get that movement of Jewish people round through into Spain and back across Europe. And then obviously you get to the point that everyone knows about really in when we're hitting the early 1900s, where the Jews are mainly concentrated through Germany into Poland and into Western Russia, Ukraine, those regions as well. And then obviously, because of everything that happened in the 1940s, rise of Nazism and the rise of Bolshevism, they then end up in Israel, going full circle background as well. But with them, obviously, they brought a lot of that. They kept the culture together, which is why you can track it. So you end up with these cultural influences that are sort of left but have come back through. But if you think about it, Sufism, it's a particular branch of Islam. So we've always had those separate religions throughout Europe, but Europe was very dominated by religion for very, very, very long time. And it's one of the reasons that the US is the US is because of the fractures within religion. And I think that starts to get to our modern issues that we have.
Yes.
We're far less religious now. And a lot of that skepticism comes as a hangover from the Protestant ideals that came forward and that constant questioning of this organized religion. And I find, especially because I used to be a member of a church, and I find that there are a lot more people people aren't atheists, people are more agnostic, or people have faith and don't talk about it. It's not a big topic.
Right.
So it's not the people, and it's that Protestantism in there as well, is that people have their faith, their ideas about faith, their ideas about religion, but it's not go to church on Sunday, do these very specific things as well, like you might have in a very Catholic country, say Spain, good example, like we brought up last time, where you've got that come in, or it's the Middle Eastern countries that are Islamic countries, where it's very much about those Islamic tenets, obviously make up things, but people still follow the religion quite closely, whereas those tenets make up a lot of our laws. Like most core law in Europe is still based on the Ten Commandments, and it came out of that, and that mixture with Roman law on top of it, and that weird mashup that we have. But people aren't religious. So you end up with this weird dichotomy where people aren't religious, but our culture is so steeped and the way we do things is in religion, that you end up with this sort of conflict, which is why I think there's such a pushback amongst certain parts of the political spectrum against Islamic immigrants being quite proud of their faith and outward and having that very structured, this is our faith, we do this, because we, especially in the UK, we've turned from, so oddly enough, UK, we have the Church of England, we have a national church, we have the bishops of that church sat in our government structure. The head of the church is the monarch, it's deeply ingrained within us, but we're not that religious, outwardly religious as such, but we still subscribe to those ideas and those core ideas that came out of that, and this came out of the Protestant Reformation. So you end up with this weird dichotomy where you get this pushback where people see that and go, well, that's not Western values. The Western values are you have your religion, but you don't talk about it. So you end up with a bit of a culture clash going on between people, which then leads to certain parts of the political spectrum going, we need to get rid of that. But then others that want to just integrate it.
I noticed everything we've been talking about. I noticed that the biggest the biggest thing about Europe seems to be the crash of different cultures. I mean, even though Europe is a big, I mean, the same thing could be said about South America too, but maybe, but to a lesser degree. But Europe, you got these different cultures. I mean, I mean, all you gotta do is to the point where you don't have to take an airplane. You can just drive to a different country, and all of a sudden everything is different. Just driving distance.
And even within our countries as well, it's such a vast cultural difference. Say, take the UK.
I know in Britain, there's a big Pakistani influence in Britain, correct?
And that's in certain spots of the country as well. So you get up around Birmingham, because it's one of the things that you always get when you get people that emigrate to a country. So it goes back to the last days of the British Empire. It was a case of, well, part of the empire, you can come here. So people would, where they were wealthier, they would move around the empire and then you'd stay in the same place. Now we all get homesick, and we want to be around things. If you go to any shop in the UK, you can tell what the predominant cultures are because we have a world food section, and that world food section will show you what are the major cultures, because obviously you're going to put on the shelves what the people buy, and it's all things from people's countries. So in our area, Reading is the most multicultural place in the UK as well. It's absolutely fascinating. So even if you go into the little Tesco's over the road, we've got quite a few Polish people in the area as well. So you can get a lot of Polish things. We've got a lot of people from Pakistan, India, Bengal, that whole area, and Nepal. There's a lot of Nepalese in this area. That's because the Nepalese, a lot of them come from the Aldershot area, and the Marks and Spencers there has a specific jacket that is popular with ex-Gurkhas. It's the only place in the UK that sells it. They kept it because it became a bit of a tradition. So you end up with these, when you go to another country, you meet up with people who are like-minded. You go to a university, there'll be, if it's in a different country, there'll be a society for your group from your country, or your sort of more possibly a religious one, or sort of a roughly ethnic one, depending on how few people or how many people there are. With that, you end up with areas that seem to be very predominantly that it's, I don't like the term, it's a very old term, ghettoization. But if you look at anything, and especially if you look at fantasy stuff, and people say, oh, such and such quarter, and it'll be named after a group that isn't a native to that area. So we have, say, people at Birmingham as well. It's where the British tradition of curries comes from, is from the people coming in at the end of the British Empire. And they settled, and obviously they settled in a similar area due to all of the reasons I've just described. And you bring along your cultural food and you fuse it together. It's one of the big things about our empire was all about trade. So all of the herbs and the spices and things, you've got traditional British foods, but then they're pushed together. Like the meal went out for last night, the work meal. That was Persian, so it's Iranian food. But you can go to a Nepalese restaurant, you can go to a Chinese restaurant, you can go to Japanese restaurants.
Yeah,
we've got a Lebanese, everything.
Yeah, I got a stat to share with you. That's pretty. You might not be surprised about it, but people born in India are the UK's largest foreign-born population, with an estimated of an estimate of 880,000 in 2020. So Indians are the single most foreign-born people in England.
Yeah, and it makes a lot of sense. India has a lot of problems. Obviously, we're talking about Europe, so I won't go into that. And there's a lot of problems. And when a country starts to have problems, you get there's the brain drain problem. The India and Pakistan have that when people get to a certain level of money and wealth and education, they can move around the world to where they like. And because of the Commonwealth and the lasting effects of the British Empire, you often get a lot of those people who come to the UK. We've always had those people there since we had India as part of the empire. So you've then got those people who are integrated, part of the population, who are as British as me. I'm traced my family back to 1066. And that's on one side. The other side was Saxons. So they've been here for ages. And then there's Celtic family, which is even further back. But funny story, when I went to university, into halls, and that's where you're first meeting the people in your corridor. There was a room at the end of the corridor, and I'm like, oh, is it going to remain empty? And I'm like, oh, I don't know. The woman who's coming to study, she's in India at the moment for a family wedding. And then she turned up and just come back from India, looked Indian. And so we expect, oh, it's an international student. The thickest London accent you could ever describe came out of it. And while they had the cultural connection still in India, she's British. That's part. Her family had been here for a very long time. which meant that obviously it's, yes, to look at her, you can tell that she has Indian ancestry, but it's no different. It's the integration. But that's part of having a large empire. It's like the Roman Empire. It's exactly the same thing. It was, you get groups of people, and over the years, they just integrate into society, and they are no different from anyone else. Even their core cultural values mesh in and don't change much either as well. So you've got these two different groups, really. It's the waves of immigration, as it were. It's a problem, which is then what causes these issues when people, we stop immigration, we don't want these immigrants coming here because they're not helping. Then we've got loads of people here who've been here for so long, they get targeted.
And it's funny because India, that's all the way in Southeast, in South Asia. You know, that's not necessarily a very short trip. That's a pretty long trip from South Asia to England, and not to mention, we don't even know what part of India they're coming from. They're coming from the Punjab region, or they're coming from the southern region of India. So
we had a point. So our Prime Minister is Rishi Sunak, well, until 4th of July. And we had at one point the Scottish First Minister, the Welsh First Minister, I think they call them First Minister, the leaders of their parliaments, and I think there was even a potential for the Northern Irish First Minister, all to be people who were of the Southeast Asian ancestry, but were obviously culturally completely British as well. So you get the integration. Our society is that integrated as well, that those barriers have sort of broken down over the years. There's been enough successive generations that you don't have this weird generational hangover of things. It's one of the reasons that us in the UK get very confused sometimes about the cultural issues in the US. Especially we understand the concept of, obviously, slavery is actually generally quite recent, but it's the integration afterwards is something that's very difficult for us to understand, because we've had our integration in Europe for a very long time. But that's the thing with the culture clashes you have in Europe, is because we've had the cultural clashes for so long, we've also learned to integrate incredibly well as well. So it's, while we do have hardline borders, they are so fuzzy. Like, once you get onto the continent, you could drive to Poland, and you'd only know you were crossing borders when you got a few miles into the country and realised that the language on the signs had changed. It's like there's more border crossings going up now, and that's part of the whole idea of the European Union. There's such a blend on the borders of all the countries. Like, how do you police that? There's no way of policing it, so they sort of gave up, really. And we're like, well, we don't. Let's just work together instead. So you've got this two. We want to keep a cultural identity because we've become a blend so quickly, but also we have to be a blend to survive.
That's the biggest thing, Aidan. There's some people in Europe who don't want cultural diffusion. They don't want their culture to be they don't want it to be diffused by other cultures coming in. As for the nationalists, the traditionalists. And I think that's also another reason why there's so much conflict in Europe, believe it or not, because you get other people from other cultures moving to other parts of Europe, and some parts don't necessarily enjoy that. There's some. I know Spain is one of them. Spain is very. I hate to say it, but they tend to be one of the more close-minded nations. They tend to be one of the nations that they stick to the guns.
It's Italy as well, especially southern Italy. And there's
Italy, it depends. It does depend.
It's quite regional in Italy where it happens. But part of that is, so I'm sure you've seen in our news the illegal immigrants coming over in boats. It's made out to be a much bigger thing than it is, and it's actually a political fighting between our government and the French government. And with the successive wars in the Middle East, we caused a lot of disruption. They needed to go somewhere. And when you've been connected to a lot of these countries because you've had an empire there and you've got a lot of people integrated, they're going to go to where their relatives are, which is how it happens when you're going to seek somewhere else because your country's messed up. because we've got that, it means a lot of people will come here. You're not going to just up sticks and move to a foreign country if there's, and this goes back to what I was saying before. You seek out part of your culture, which you still want some of your culture to combat that homesickness, and eventually you integrate them into society properly. But if you're going somewhere, you're going to do that. So end up, there were camps in Calais where we were like, oh, we're not letting these people in. We need to decide. And the government's argued over asylum seekers for so long, the system became a mess and is overloaded now. So we've ended up in a situation where we can't do anything but just turn everyone away and just try and reset it so that it can actually be dealt with properly. With Spain and Italy, you have the same thing with the African conflicts. So obviously, all the stuff that happened it was when Obama was in, and obviously like bombing North African places. That then led to waves of immigration, and the closest places that they'll go to, where they've got the cultural connections, are Spain and Italy. So you end up with that clash of cultures in there, where they can get quite a hard line on keeping that. But then this goes back to the religion as well, because obviously Spain is a much more religious country as well. So you end up with that as well.
And we have a guest. We have good morning, Dungeon Dan. How are you doing, my good friend? Dungeon Dan is in the house. Thank you for watching, Dungeon Dan.
Yeah, so you end up having this. It's one of the things that causes issues. We need to move on from this point as well, even though it is one of the really core points of because we've had empires, we've had a lot of people come from those empires into our countries. When there are conflicts in those countries now, when people want to leave those countries, they'll go to where their relatives have gone, which was the imperial country that had the empire, because that's where the people are. How we deal with that, no one's really quite worked out, which is what's creating a lot of strife and a lot of pushback and some quite hardcore ideas, especially amongst the right wing, especially far right, mainly as well. And that pushback is a lot of it is because it hasn't been dealt with properly, because no one's really dealt with it properly. One of the things that then goes on top of that as well is post Cold War.
Yes.
That ended in 1990.
Yes. The Berlin Wall.
Yeah, that's I was alive in 1990.
Yeah.
I remember it happening. Yeah, it's one of my earlier memories. Obviously, growing up on an RAF base. Pretty important news for a NATO military base. For something like that's happened as well. So while I was very young and don't have like memories of watching it on TV or anything like that, that feeling of that change that happened then. So we've been trying to reset from that, but part of that meant rebuilding Eastern Germany, which then that took in the 90s was quite prosperous. US, UK especially, because we just got over all of the trouble from the Second World War. And then after that, we had, for us, it was dealing with the collapse of our empire, another conflict. And then obviously with the Cold War, you then got straight afterwards, you go into Korea. And then for you guys, you have Vietnam as well. And that didn't end properly until the 80s. There was still political ramifications from that. That's, again, in easy living memory as well. So we've only really just got out the other side of those conflicts when along comes a recession. Just as everything's really good in the 90s and we're fixing everything, you then hit the early thousands and then the finances all fall apart. But there hasn't been enough time to fix all of those initial problems that have occurred while dealing with the recession. So you're now dealing with this restructuring of Europe from after the Cold War. And on top of that, you're dealing with major financial recessions across Europe. That's also the early days of the euro coming in. I remember the euro coming in as well. That was quite an interesting thing as well. And obviously, as the recession hits, just as that's doing things, and you've got countries like Spain was still really quite poor because it had only just come out of a dictatorship. It's like people forget how long they were in a dictatorship for as well. So you've got these countries who've all been struggling. And realistically, you're only really looking at Scandinavian countries, the UK, Ireland, and France, really, and Western Germany, and then obviously the Netherlands, Denmark, so sort of that Northwest European bloc that actually had all of that good stuff from the 90s. The rest of the countries are struggling with it. And during that integration, obviously, you have this economic collapse that crosses the entire world.
And I know the Balkans was pretty bad in the mid-90s too. The Balkans was in a really bad shape. Like I said, my Croatian friend told me the same thing, that Croatia never got out of socialist government to the mid-90s. It took them to the mid-90s to get out of being socialist.
And the problem you get with that is if you're trying to get rid of sort of because communism did horrible things to Eastern Europe, so they're really anti-communism, and then the socialism connected to it, because obviously you've got the connections between socialism and communism, and what the Soviet Union was doing in their countries. It's kind of dirty politics to be going that route, no matter, even if you're, say, like a socialist in Northwest Europe. We've got democratic socialism. That's Scandinavia. We've got a lot of it over here as well, and into sort of going down as you go further south and east. Obviously, it peters out, but that's because we were able to take those ideas of socialism. We were in a Cold War against normally socialist countries. Therefore, we're very careful about how we integrated those systems into society. And those, so they don't want that there, but that's really all the political parties that they've got. So the only way you're going to get out of that is having someone reactionary. And then you've got the issue of how far right are they going? Because the real big pushback against the Soviets was obviously the Nazis at first.
Yeah.
And then a lot of those countries had were under the Nazi heel for many years as well. So you got fascism. The wars. This guy that I read his stuff on Quora, and he fought in the wars, in the Balkan Wars, and he recounts a tale of there was an old man that came out, and he was wearing his SS uniform and had his gun that he'd kept. They were still there in the 90s, and they saw that as a way of getting rid of socialism. It's not that they all had Nazi ideology, but they were the people who were strong enough to push back against those ideals. So when you look now, say Orban in Hungary, Hungary went incredibly right wing. Austria, they redid their election because they ended up electing a neo-Nazi. And they were like, well, we've been here before, let's not do that again. So redid their election, because they realised they've gone far too far the other way, because the middle ground parties hadn't really been fixing all of these issues. A lot of them hadn't had time to fix any of the issues. And there's things that have hit one after each other. So you think, so from the recession, we're just about sorting ourselves out after the recession. Everyone's starting to get back on their feet. And this is stuff that's happened in the US as well. You then have all of the strife that comes up afterwards of how do we deal with that. After that, it's starting to get a bit better. Then we get hit with COVID, just as that's all starting to get better, which then causes further recessions across the countries. That then causes a lot of reactionary politics and people wanting something fixed, because all they're seeing is.
I like to call that recency bias. That's what I like to call it.
Yes, yeah. So you end up with this situation where people are looking at it going, well, we won the Cold War. So, like, as the winners, all we've seen in our lifetimes is, everything was really good. You guys did really well. It's our turn to have all of this good stuff. All right, brilliant. And then, no, here's a recession. Here's, we'll get an education so I can get a better job, so I can have the money to deal with the rising prices. Oh, wait, that's going up in price as well. And it's harder to get. And then you get the defunding of major institutions over here. For example, education struggling, and the National Health Service is struggling as well, because they had to get money from somewhere. But all of the problems that they had before, which were sort of managerial in a sense, weren't getting resolved because there was no need to resolve them. That was sort of petty issues. But as soon as you start the defunding of those institutions, those issues become really big. But now you're fighting again. It's the same thing. You're fighting against two things at the same time, and no one can. You can't fix one without fixing the other.
Right.
Fixing both at the same time,
Mhm.
you have to do something pretty extreme. But people don't want extremism. Europe is fed up with extremism. You've
Yeah.
had far left extremism coming from the east, from the Soviet Union. Had far right extremism coming from the Nazis, and then
Yeah.
in the fascist dictatorship in Spain.
Yep.
And obviously Italy with
It's
the
right.
birthplace of modern fascism. So you got,
Yes.
well, we don't want that either.
Right.
And then we look around and go, well, what else don't we like? Well, there's the religious extremism. So all of
Yeah.
the stuff.
Fundamentalism.
Yeah, see, the fundamentalism, the Middle East is completely messed up after the Second World War, especially with everything else going on. They're being funded by the Soviet Union, and you end up with a lot of the extreme ends of the Islamic groups in charge. So you've got religious extremism. Well, we don't want that. Then we look over at the US and go, well, that is generally quite an extreme way of running a country. We're trying to run this middle ground, but nobody's in the middle ground doing it properly. They're sort of like it's like trying to hold water in your hands. It just goes through.
Yeah.
There's nothing
Right.
much you can do about it.
Right.
So we're ending up with a lot of the parties being really quite extreme. If you look at the policies the Conservatives are coming out for their election manifesto, you've got the reintroduction of national service, setting up a committee to ban degrees that they don't like, forcing the next generation into what education or the military that they want to do. It's like that's starting to sound very, very fascist. That's basically the policies that Hitler used to get into power. And they work. They fix a country that's been through a lot of financial hell. The problem is all of the ideology that comes along with it, and we've seen that happen. And we can look outwards, and we've had very fractious politics over here as well. We've gone through so many prime ministers; it's utterly ridiculous, and that's with the same party being in power for about a decade.
Right. Now I got a good one for you, Aiden. It's going to be a bit of a tangent, but you'll see how it connects the dots in a few. Video games, PC RTS games can also kind of contribute to Europe's fractured relationship because Age of Empires is a good one because you got these European factions, especially Age of Empires 2. You got European nations fighting each other to see who wins. You got England, France. The Goths, so that kind of contributes. Like, oh, my nation's better than yours because I can beat it in an RTS game. Then, but the funny thing about Age of Empires, though, Microsoft and the developers did a wonderful job not playing too much bias towards one civilization over the other. They're relatively balanced, and to this day, they're still balancing out the different civilizations. Now you go to a game like
with this. It's a very good point. Yeah.
Now you go to Cossacks, and then you got the Ukrainians. They got the most overpowered. They got the most overpowered shooting unit, the Civic, and the horse cavalry. They're overpowered because Cossacks was defended by a Ukrainian developer. So you got to give up to the Ukrainians.
So
and then if you play Blitzkrieg, which is a World War II strategy game, that was developed by a Russian. That's a Russian developer. So the Soviet Union is all overpowered.
Yep. And if you played the American games that came out at the same time as those, all the American units were overpowered.
And then you got games you got Rome Total War, my personal favorite. But the funny thing about that one, that was developed by Creative Assembly, which is in the United Kingdom. Mm-hmm. Right? So even though they made the Roman units kind of overpowered, they also made the Celtic units pretty strong as well. The Celtic units, since the CA is in the UK, so you got to show some love for the Brits, the Britons. I know, and if you ever play World Total War, the British have these headhunters. They literally throw heads, and they're an OP unit, headhunters. and then you also got Empire Total War, which is that takes place in the Napoleon era, around the same time as Cossacks, but it's turn based. And England tends to be a little more overpowered than some of the other nations. So, there's some bias towards video games as well. It even goes into video games.
This is, of course, he said something like that. This point you're making is very interesting. It's one thing that I think it's never really been tackled by our politics, and I think it leads into the issues that Europe's having, and that is just the internet in general. So you think about it, the internet only really came about in the 90s, and it was quite late in the 90s the internet was a thing, and it was only really when I was in sixth form that it became pretty much everyone had access to some form of internet. When I got to university, it then escalated very quickly. I went to university before Facebook was a thing. That became a thing for us. That was 2004. I went to university. So Facebook became a thing because I was a student. We had earlier access. Would have been towards the end of my first year into my second year. And then especially obviously when it went completely live in my third year at university. So we've had this this rise of social media and the internet, but at the same time, obviously with the hit of the recession and everything getting worse, people are looking for ways of doing something simpler. Now, if everyone's got the internet, and the internet over here is not too expensive in general and is actually pretty good. We don't pay a huge amount for our internet. We go for basically one of the cheapest. I've got an incredibly good internet connection. And now with our mobile phones, we can be on the internet constantly. What that does is it brings the whole world together. You can get contacts to people in other countries very easy. I could get into conversations, like we've got a family group on Facebook, and my auntie from the US will be in there. My auntie from South Africa will be in there. I'll be in there. My great uncle in Scotland will be in there, and my dad in Thailand, and we'll be there. And it's a live internet connection with no lag. So we've all got that connection with the complete diverse cultures that we're living in that are all pulled together very quickly, and that's just within one family. Now, when you can't do much, but the internet's cheap enough, people spend a lot of time on the internet. That reduces connectivity between people in society in general. And then when the government wants to produce money, they turn around and go, well, no one's using the playgrounds, so we're going to save money by not doing that, not putting any of them in, which means the kids got nowhere outside to play. Which means they're more likely to stay inside, and then they get influenced, as you say, the computer games. You get into one niche of computer games or another, there ends up being quite an incredibly strong bias to certain ideologies, certain thought,
I can't write politics. There is one series again I can recommend to you. That's Civilization. That plays no bias to anyone. Although to be fair, it was developed by Sid Meier, who's Canadian. So, he really has no dog in the game. He's a Canadian
Did you ever play Civilization 1?
Yeah.
That's where I got started. I played Civ 1. And when I got Civ 2 was such a change from Civ 1. And I went back and played Civ 1. I was like, how did we ever play this? It was so simple. But it's, as you say, yeah, you've got this and these rise of these games, especially if you've got more time to sit down and do these things, these big open world things as well. And if you look at mobile gaming as another example, you look at obviously Clash of Clans was very big for years, and clans, people joining together in clans. Well, that's just a recipe for people grouping up to go against other people, and a lot of those would be based on national or ethnic groupings, partly for practical reasons, the national ones because of language as well. So you end up with people find their communities online now. You can have someone in the UK who's, when you think about it, the people I speak to online, and when we sit and we have chats and things, pretty much most of the people I speak to online are from the US. There's very few people from the UK I actually speak to.
Dungeon Dan actually has a really good point with this comment. I mean, this is a super good point.
Yeah.
I mean, you're not wrong, Dungeon Dan. You are not wrong.
Ironically, it is in and of itself the cause of that, because it's easier to disseminate that, and technology is moving so rapidly. I think AI, obviously, the big thing now, creating fake news and politics. And then if you look at the Russian troll farms, The amount of propaganda
Yeah,
that comes out of them, and then that seeps into the consciousness. And then
I think.
memes are a
Yeah,
great example of this.
I
Something
mean,
creeps into memes, and then gets a life of its own.
Dungeon Dan brings up a really wonderful point. I mean,
Mm.
the problem, Dungeon Dan, is that yellow journalism is a very strong demon indeed. Yellow journalism is a very strong demon, stronger than any of us. And like you said, with AI, it's going to make it even stronger because, some people can't, some people are not very good at telling what is AI and what is real. In fact, there's people out there that can make a fake video with Donald Trump saying a certain thing, even though it wasn't Donald Trump, it was an AI or
Yeah,
or same thing with Joe Biden.
yeah.
So I mean, so Dungeon Dan, he's correct with what he's saying. We should be able to direct communicate with each other, but yellow journalism is a demon, man. It's a very strong demon that I think it's bigger than we might think it is.
This goes back to what I was saying about how we've had these underlying problems that we've been too busy tackling something else for people to actually seriously sit down and think about it. You think the age of politicians. We've got some quite young politicians in the country. We've got MPs that there's quite a few of them that are younger than me as well. And I'm not particularly old. I'm in my late 30s now, which is
Mhm.
about our average age. We've got a fairly young group of people in politics coming up. And it's only now that we've got people that actually understand and have grown up and live with all of this.
You're not wrong, Dungeon. Yeah, you're
Yeah,
not wrong, man.
I've seen a video about that on YouTube.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
So you end up with this issue that hasn't been tackled because you get a lot of the people that could tackle it have gone, well, that's difficult because they didn't grow up with it. They weren't steeped in internet culture, therefore they don't quite understand how to tackle it.
That's
And
the
then as you're
thing
saying,
too.
then as you're saying with journalism, is how do you go about dealing with news and then deciding what news is okay and what news isn't okay?
I got
That is
this
a
big
can of worms.
because I got this problem with my father because he's a boomer, okay, he's gonna be 71 and next week he's gonna be 71, so he didn't grow up in the information age, so I kind of have to educate him that, hey pops, you can't necessarily believe everything you see on the internet because there's not a fake news out there, not a yellow journalism. You have to be very careful what you believe in, or better yet, you ask me because I can decipher what's fact or fiction. And I think that's the biggest demographic that tends to fall into yellow journalism, the older generation that might not have gone into the information age, or they might not be as familiar, or might never had none enough. Well, I mean, it's not their fault. They just grew up in a different era.
One of the biggest things we did in this country, which was actually a really good, there was an attempt to tackle this at the beginning of the internet age, and obviously this is another thing that came out of the 90s. There was the advent of terms like the silver surfers, so old people getting on the internet, and we had something called ECDL, which was the European Computer Driving License, which was a fancy name for essentially an adult education of teaching people who didn't grow up with the internet or weren't in school at the time how to use computers and how to use the technology and how to work through that and make it part of their daily lives. Remember, my mum went on the course. My mum's pretty tech savvy to start off with, but she went on that course and ended up teaching it the next year as well. But even there's things that I will talk to my mum about, and it's because she didn't grow up with it. She's had to actively learn it. There is a slight difference that goes along with that of what you know. But I'm finding it now, especially online as well. I feel like a bit of an old man in certain groups, especially with memes that I brought up earlier. Is one thing, the information that comes through memes. Learning about something in politics through a meme is I could obviously translate them, but my son he will know exactly what's
Right.
going on. Oh, this is from this and this is political, so you then have all the context for it that I don't have, and that's even someone who grew up with all of this as well.
Man, Dungeon Dan, man, you're on a roll today, buddy. You're coming out with some really good points. I mean, we're pointing for the neutral ground, stop censorship. But the problem is, Dungeon Dan, they want clicks, they want sales. That's it. I mean, it's greed, and that's another problem. It's greed, and it's not just American media; it's a European media do the same thing. The European media does the same thing.
Yeah, and when you have a group of underlying problems, this is the problem that as he says, you've got the media companies need to stay relevant. They need people to go onto their site. So the whole clickbait concept as well. They do that because if you're not going through to the clickbait, you're never going to see when they do that proper news. I used to go through, if I saw a news story, I said, well, obviously I'm a trained historian, so this is what I would just generally do for a lot of things anyway. I'd find something that I knew was from one bias, and then I'd find something that was from a bias on the other side. Then I'd have a look at Reuters and the Associated Press for literally just the facts.
And that is correct. It's a worldwide issue. Yeah, it is. Mm-hmm.
I balance that. So I'll be doing it when we have our the election results. I'll probably book the next day off and watch them because I'm actually interested in watching them for this election. It's something I've always done. I used to have my computer on, the TV on, and my phone on, and I would have different channels reporting on it. So there's the Telegraph, which is nicknamed the Tory Graph over here because it's quite right-wing and supports the Conservative Party. However, they have incredibly good election reporting. I then have the Independent up, which is known for being further to the left, either supporting the Labour Party or the Lib Dems, depending on the issues. And then the BBC, which is essentially a national news. And there is bias. They tend to be biased towards the sitting government just because they're a national news corporation. As long as you know that, they're actually pretty good. But I have all of them there differently getting these results. And mainly I'm watching the data on it. But it's the little bit snippets of information, the interpretations in between, that you'd start getting these issues. And those are reputable news sources that have a known and quite obvious and open bias. We, like the Telegraph, openly support a fairly traditional right-wing platform. That they always have done. They stick to that. We're not talking what we would call red tops over here. So the Sun, the Mirror, things like that. That's sensationalist stories. That's the stuff that Dan's talking about here. And there's turn up running things. Oh, possibly not. We can't agree on anything. Like we're worse than politicians for agreeing.
I mean, I know what Dungeon Dan is trying to say, but historians, man, we're terrible when it comes to agreeing on things. Aiden out. A little tangent. Did you see that the post that went viral about the woman that claimed that the Roman Empire never existed?
No, I haven't seen that, but I've come across that school of thought before.
I don't know if Dungeon Dan knows what I'm talking about. He might know what I'm talking about. There's a woman, a crazy woman that says, "Oh, the Roman Empire never existed. It's all a myth." And I'm like, then you got idiots, and that's the problem with historians. You got fake ones who claim to know that the Roman Empire didn't exist. Meanwhile, we have the most artifacts we find are Roman, so
Something interesting that actually comes out of that with historians being in charge. So my undergraduate degree is ancient history and archaeology. It used to be, before my time as well, it was nicknamed the civil service degree because of how a historian will gather all the sources together, sort through, and then try and find the middle ground. The practical skills that it gave you meant you'd be very good in the civil service, sorting out large amounts of information, doing these reports and bringing all of this together. It meant that actually our parliament for a long while was historians were overrepresented. We had, I think it was over half of our MPs actually trained historians at one point. So we kind of tried it over here and it didn't work. So it's that bias. Now it's gone different. Personally, I know this sounds really weird considering the messes they've made. Accountants, I think accountants make better politicians because they're boring as hell, the good ones. John Major's a classic example of this, known for being incredibly boring, but he was incredibly good with the numbers. He could sit down and go, well, it looks good now. In 10 years' time, it's all going to fall apart. He predicted the recession. He said, if you don't sort out what we're doing now, we're going to end up in that recession. And he was right. But politically, obviously, he wasn't very good as a prime minister about being out there and doing stuff. He did a lot behind the scenes. He's very much more a civil servant than the politician.
And that's the thing about historians. I mean, I can't put this in the nicest way possible. Historians like us, we're good at pointing out the problems. We're just not very good at pointing out solutions. It's the nicest way I can say it.
Yeah, we'll gather all the information together. We'll give you a nice report on all the different things that you can do, but don't bloody ask us to choose which one you're going to do. That's up to someone else.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, it's a very good way of putting it, Angel. Very good way of putting it.
You know, and listen, Aiden, I'm not saying it to, because I'm a historian myself. I'm a historic buff, so you know, I'm kind of criticizing myself as well. You know, we might now if I'm going to say the not so nice, but I'm going to say we're bloody butchers. And we just like to bitch about everything, but we never want to come up with solutions.
Yeah. Well, no, that's also very true.
But Aiden, man, I can't. I don't know where the time went. We're 10 minutes over the hour, man. Wow.
Yeah.
You know, we are well beyond the. But man, this was a really fun conversation. One that we might have to revisit at a later time. But before we go, I'm going to pull this up comment here. I like when people argue the reach of the Roman Empire regardless of the evidence found. Hell, 1,000 years from now, they will be saying the same thing about the reach of the United States. Yeah. Yeah, pretty much, Dungeon. Yeah. I mean, there's already people talking about the Spanish Empire. How far did they really go? How big the Spanish Empire was. So, yeah, we're not far off. We're not far off that cliff. We're going to be hitting that cliff. Oh, and actually, there was even another person that claimed that Alexander the Great was a myth.
I've come across that before. Yeah. He's starting to become the same as King Arthur figure.
And then you got King Arthur. Yeah, he's nothing but the Greek version of King Arthur. Yeah, something stupid like that. So, I mean. Yeah, it's all kinds of craziness. Aiden, man, we're gonna have to come back to this topic on a later day, man. It's just so much to talk about.
I'd suggest we do that after the 4th of July when we've had our election over here.
Yeah,
because then we can hit in sort of possibly focus a bit more on the UK and the history side of why we do our politics like we do. So that could be quite interesting as well. Carrying on from this and then seeing how people have reacted to what people have said in the elections and why historically that connects in with all of this. So we're doing that weird thing where we're talking about politics, but we're not talking about politics, we're talking about how the history has got here as well.
Yeah, Dungeon. Yeah, well, no, we're gonna do it again, Dungeon. But you know, we're gonna do it after the 4th of July so that Aiden has time to reminisce and talk about what the hell happened with the UK elections. You know, that I don't know why they're doing it the 4th of July. It's funny because that's the day of independence for us from I'm not going to get into that, but I just find it really funny.
It's the reason it's the 4th of July is because the 4th of July will be a Thursday. Our elections always happen on a Thursday.
Really?
Because that's the day people are less likely to be drunk. It's no medieval practice. But it's a true story. That's a true thing.
It's a true story. No, I'm laughing because it's true. I'm just like, it's like, man. Wait. I want to. Before we go, I want to ask an honest question. Do you think Americans or Brits get more drunk? Let's be honest here. Or is it kind of even?
I'd say these days, especially with the big movement of craft beers in the northeastern US, especially, I think British people drink more. I suppose it's a more European thing. We drink more often at a low level. So, for example, I've had this bottle of beer. I haven't even finished it.
Heineken, right?
It's been over an hour.
Good
so
stuff.
we will just sit and have a beer. Whereas in the US, I find there's a lot more of when people are going to drink, they go out and drink. So
yeah, they go out. They do it big.
Yeah.
Right, they do it big. Right, I got you.
It's like everything in the US. If you're going to do it, you do it big.
Yeah, we always like to do it bigger here in the United States. So it's not always for the better, but it is what it is. Here we go. The two countries should get together for a shindig and find out who gets drunker.
Shindig. Well, I went out all last night, got home at 4 a.m. and I was still compass mentis enough to have this conversation. So yeah, I'm up for that.
Yeah, but man, this was a fun topic. And and guys, in case you didn't get to see it live, please check out the YouTube. Before we go, I want to say check out the YouTube channel, the Book Assignment Podcast on YouTube. The episode will be uploaded there later today, so go check that out. If in case you missed it, it's also on the Book Assignment Podcast Facebook group. So go check us out there. And go check out the YouTube channel. And it's not only our podcast. You're gonna have Dungeon Dan's Real 9 podcast where he talks about horror movies. You got Jennifer Falk talking about post-apocalyptic authors. Then you got Jack and A.L. White talking about sci-fi authors. That might be something you might enjoy, being a sci-fi freak as well. And you got the Book Assignment podcast that Jen and Dungeon Dan do, where they interview different authors. So, lots of stuff to go. Lots of stuff on the YouTube channel. So please check us out on the Book Assignment podcast on YouTube, so you can check out other episodes of our podcast and some of the other podcasts that you might enjoy. But anyway, Aiden, this was fun, man. And also, hold on, Dungeon Dan also said Paranormal Proximity is coming out with new episodes. So yeah, if you're into the paranormal,
yes,
you can check that out as well.
Yeah.
So there you go. We got some more stuff. But anyway, it's time for us to go. I got stuff to do in a few, so I'm gonna have to leave you guys. But this was a wonderful episode, one that we went over the hour by quite a bit. And Aiden is drinking his Heineken and I'm sure he was having a lot of fun doing that. And thank you, Dungeon Dan, for joining us. It's always more fun when you're around. Yeah, thank you, man.
Thank you very much.
Check us out on YouTube. So, but until then, we'll see you in a couple of weeks. This has been Suetonian Angelus Maximus. That's been the Gate, Aiden Cordia. We'll see you in 2 weeks, and I'll let you know what the topic is. Take it easy, guys.
Take care.